Well, happy October the 5th of 2024. You have reached the channel High Voltage. And for those of you who are familiar with this channel, I'm going to carry on where we were. For those of you that stumbled across me for whatever reason, I am reading Ask Not, the Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. Plus, I'm reading Psychology of Secrets, written by the most exemplary podcast content creator I've ever listened to, Andrew Gold. Now today, we're kicking it off with Ask Kennedy, because I've not read anything from Ask Kennedy in 3 to 4 days. And yeah, so for those of you who have not been here before, this channel is essentially, if you want to know why I originally started the channel, it is in most of my videos. However, I started a petition on change.org, search Lasha Rojenko, and that will fill you in as to why I started this channel. I'm trying to build a charity without donations. So, we left off with part 5, Ted's Blondes. And to catch up, I do have 2 playlists with Ask Not, the Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. And you can put it in order of videos or clips, and then you can put it in order of, first video uploaded to newest, wherever you are in the book. So if you're reading this book along with me, we're on page 11, and I read this little tiny piece yesterday at the end of reading chapter 1 of Andrew Gold's Psychology in Seattle. However, I will reiterate this paragraph, and also I am not interjecting through the reading unless something really strikes me that is valid to the point in which I'm speaking of. So we're leaving it, or starting back up. We left it off with page 110, and we're picking it up with page 111 at the top, Mary Jo Kopechny. For her work extended to nights and weekends, Mary Jo earned $7,500 a year. Her male counterparts were earning twice that. Mary Jo was Bobby's star, the sharpest and most dedicated of his junior staff. She was so pretty that her office nickname was Twiggy, like the ultra-model, doe-eyed model. Behind her back, the other women called her a prude. Yet as Bobby's profile ramped up and his candidacy for president was announced, rumors circulated in New York and D.C. that he and Mary Jo were having an affair. Now, this is prior to Bobby Kennedy's assassination, which took right on live television. My mother saw it and she found it traumatizing to this day. It wasn't that outlandish. Mary Jo and Bobby did travel together while campaigning, and they did stay in the same hotels. It was no secret that Mary Jo was in love with Bobby. The men she dated knew they couldn't compare. For Mary Jo, Bobby Kennedy and whatever he or his family needed came first. "She'll never marry me," one boyfriend told Mary Jo's father. "She's married to the Kennedys." Again, another young, vulnerable girl in which they're taking advantage of. inequality of pay, extra hours. She was highly dedicated, married to the Kennedys. I also believe that Ted Kennedy was hitting on her because he was grieving for his brother, and Bobby Kennedy knew how much Mary Jo idolized Bobby Kennedy. And when I say idolized, I mean idolized. Her boyfriend was right. If Mary Jo heard the rumors about her and Bobby sleeping together, she never said a thing. Whispers like that were just another way to discredit women who were outperforming men. A woman. Mary Jo knew her value, and she knew that if Bobby won the White House, there was no doubt he'd be taking her with him. How many junior male staffers did Bobby hold in similar esteem? She was the one weighing in on drafts of his speeches. She was the one who could mock him and get away with it. Everything you've ever wanted. No, that would be him. Anything you've ever wanted. She told him after his staff gifted him a globe, the world globe. I didn't put that globe there purposely, I promise. Bobby laughed. He loved it. Mary Jo's irreverence and self-deprecation delighted him. So in other words, she made herself the brunt of jokes. That's a very bad habit to get into just from experience. She knew she wasn't one of the cool kids and didn't try to compensate. Instead, she would joke about how square she was. This endeared her to Bobby, who by turns could be shy, mean-spirited, compassionate, vengeful, empathetic, religious, unfaithful, ruthless, a marvel with his little children, and the most attentive listener one could ever hope for. He gifted Mary Jo a framed photo of herself at her desk, the back of her head to the camera. There's no photo of it, just to let everybody know. I just took a sip of water. You work so hard, he inscribed. Bobby, obviously. This is the only way I ever see you. Mary Jo had a guideless view of the world. Sorry, I repeat. Mary Jo had a guideless view of the world. There was right and wrong, good and evil, heaven and hell. She still kept dolls and stuffed animals in her childhood bedroom under more photos of JFK and Bobby. To her was all good. In turn, he spared Mary Jo the worst of himself. Yet she was also born for politics and understood all that came with it, compromise, moral and otherwise. The massaging of inconvenient truths of the power of images and how to manipulate them. She was drawn to the counterculture and obsessed with the musical hair. On the advance trip to White's Barge, Pennsylvania, in the fall of 1966, it was Mary Jo who figured out that Bobby's designated speaking location needed to be moved so that television cameras would capture even a small crowd looking like 10,000 fans. Wow, TV tricks go way back. Even from somebody as innocent as Mary Jo, that doesn't sound like an honest thing to do, but I'm not judging. I'm just simply stating She wants to do right or wrong, but she's participating in little games that she would have learned from the Kennedys because she was deemed as not helpless. Oh, okay, sorry. The tragic legacy of self-seriousness when he announced his run for President of the United States in March. It became her mission to get the American electorate to see Bobby as she did, the answer. Okay. June 5th, 1968. Los Angeles, 2:02 a.m. Mary Jo was at the Ambassador Hotel when Bobby finished addressing his supporters in the embassy bathroom. The California primary results were in, and Bobby was the leading Democratic candidate, ahead of his nearest by 7%, Lyndon Johnson, who had succeeded Jack after the assassination, had announced he would not be seeking a second term. The narration had been further traumatized by the escalating war in Vietnam and the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. on a Memphis hotel balcony on April the 4th. Bobby was poised to be a bookend of healing. The younger Kennedy brother who was preaching unity and grace. It was Bobby who had broken the news of Martin Luther King's death to a largely black crowd of thousands in Indianapolis, and who, despite his inordained privilege, helped ease the collective shock. Wearing a black overcoat that had belonged to Jack, Bobby quoted a message that meant a great deal to him. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until, in our own despair against our will comes will." Let me repeat that. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until, in our own despair against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or they be black. Let us dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago: to tame the savages of man and to make gentle in the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves so that, and say a prayer for our country and for our people. It was a speech Bobby himself cobbled together on the fly, yet it was the most heartfelt and impactful of his political career. It was that kind of humanity that was going to make him the next president of the United States. "So many thanks to all of you," Bobby said in his LA victory speech, "and on to Chicago, and let's win there." It was his last line of night. The crowd at the Ambassador going crazy for him, chanting, "We want Bobby! We want Bobby!" over and over. He was meant to be safe among his people, yet two of America's most prominent black athletes, friends of Bobby's, had volunteered to bodyguard him that night. Rafer Johnson, the two-time Olympic and former NBA NFL lineman Rosie Greer, despite what had happened to Jack, presidential candidates were still not afforded Secret Service protection? Bobby had mentioned both men in his speech. To my old friend, if I may, Rafer Johnson is here, Bobby said, and to Rosie Greer, who said that he'd take care of anyone who didn't vote for me. Who said that he'd take care of anyone who didn't vote for me. Bobby began making his way to the ambassador's back exit through the kitchen. Ethel, who had been by his side as he spoke, was trailing just behind. Can you imagine? Reporters, busboys, and kitchen staff surrounded him as he did, and always allowed photographers to take picture and the television cameras. The dispensing crowd outside could hear what sounded like a thump, but no one could blanched. RFK, 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 RFK. The thump had been the first of 3 gunshots. Now Bobby Kennedy lay on the kitchen floor bleeding as Johnson and Greer. See, I don't understand how these bodyguards let that man get to him. I'm absolutely befuddled. So at any rate, a 17-year-old immigrant busboy from New Mexico named Juan Romero cradled Bobby's head as he struggled to speak. His lips were moving, but no words came out. Romero lowered his ear to Bobby's mouth. Is everybody okay? Bobby asked. His blood was pouring through Romero's fingers. Yes, Romero said, everybody is okay. He took his rosary from his shirt pocket and wrapped it around Bobby's right, and while hand-holding Bobby's head off the cold concrete floor, Bobby turned his right slightly. Everything's going to be okay, he said. That is so unbelievably sad. On June the 6th at 1:44 a.m., after one day in intensive care at LA's Good Samaritan Hospital, R.F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. He had been shot 3 times, the fatal bullet through his head. His assassin, Sirhan, later said he killed Bobby for his pro-Israel views and for contributing to the persecution of Palestine. Bobby's death was yet another national trauma. His campaign itself, which prioritized civil rights and the adoration and the work he did for people living in poverty. A bomb went off after the assassination of JFK and Milk. Is that Harvey Milk? Or Bobby Kennedy had allowed and encouraged, really, America once again to look to the funeral with hope. To look to the future with hope. Freudian slip. To reject the carnage of the 1960s. Now, Bobby was another victim of that change. His body was flown back to New York. Thousands lined up to view his casket, St. Patrick's Cathedral, before he was taken by train to Washington, where thousands more stood along the route and saluted. Ted Kennedy, the last surviving Kennedy brother, eulogized him, a eulogy written not by Ted himself, but Kennedy's speechwriters. This eulogy came to define Bobby's legacy. And the eulogy reads, My brother need not be idolized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life, to be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it. And he said many times in many parts of his nation to those he touched and who sought to touch him, some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not? Mary Jo's grief in the wake of RFK's death was even more paralyzing than that of JFK, had been killed in 1963. She traveled on Bobby's funeral train. She helped pack up his office, a task that, in its enormity and finality, took months. One day she sat at her desk for hours, staring straight ahead and not moving, not saying a word, leaving her colleagues to ask if she needed help getting home. When all the work was done, Mary Jo Kopechne, rising star, moved away from D.C. And we'll leave it at page 115 and start off with more of Mary Jo Kopechne and Ted's Blondes tomorrow. That is a wrap, and soon I will be reading Andrew Gould's Psychology of Secrets. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Be super kind to yourselves, and I mean that. Eat well, drink lots of water, treat yourself kindly. If anybody wants a free reading or a tarot card read, you know you can email me. I do them for free because I love to. And it's my thank you to all of you for taking the time for me. It's a two-way street in this community, and that is a wrap.